Hello and welcome to another edition of News for English Learners, Vocabulary Matters. So, as usual, we will be looking at an article taken from the news and we'll read it through and analyze some of the vocabulary. I'll try to explain the meanings and the different uses. Don't forget, the objective of these videos is for you to try to expand your vocabulary. If you do that, then you will also find one of the benefits is that your fluency will also increase, because part of the problem is when you speak a foreign language, sometimes you just can't remember that particular word to express what you want to say. But of course, if your vocabulary is larger, if it's bigger, if it's more extensive, then you've got a lot more options to choose from. And that is particularly the case with English, because English has a vast vocabulary. It's absolutely enormous. So the more words you have, even if you only learn them passively, the better your fluency will be eventually when you actually use them in conversation. So that is why reading is so important. And unfortunately, it's one of those skills that a lot of people neglect. They think, okay, I just want to focus on speaking, forget reading, it's not important. But I disagree with that completely. And that is why I started these videos to try to help you on that journey. So let's begin, as usual, with the first paragraph. The incident occurred when a landslide caused a section of the tunnel to collapse, trapping 40 workers inside. The workers were building the tunnel as part of the government's ambitious project to improve connectivity to famous pilgrimage sites. Rescuers have been working around the clock to save the workers, and officials managed to get in touch with the men and have been giving out food, water, and oxygen while they try to work out a plan. However, they face a difficult challenge to create an exit route for the workers. So the first word we have highlighted at the top here is a noun. It's landslide. And if we look at this word, we could see it's composed of two other words, right? The first one is land. And probably you've seen this before in certain words. For example, England, the country where I'm from, originally meant the land of the Angles. The Angles were a Germanic tribe that emigrated to what we now call England or Great Britain many years ago. So land refers to the earth. No? It's the place where we live, and it's what we stand on, what we build on, what we use for farming. And slide, the second part of this noun, is actually or can be used as a verb to slide. And it's an irregular verb, slid in the past. And the easiest way to think of this is to think of a children's playground attraction. If you go to any park in any part of the world, you will often see a thing which is called a slide. And a slide is a device which children go up, they climb up to the top, and then they sit down at the top and they slide down a kind of chute. So to slide basically means to move in a lateral direction. And a landslide happens when the land, the earth, actually moves, usually due to some kind of erosion or perhaps a weather phenomenon. I think in this case, there has been a lot of rain in this part of India, and that has caused the earth to become unstable. And it's a little bit like an avalanche when you get a large amount of snow that falls down the mountain in a similar way. We can actually see some examples of different types of landslides here in the illustration. So moving on to the second word, this is the verb to collapse. It's a regular verb, so it's collapsed in the past. And to collapse is what happens when something falls down dramatically, suddenly. In this case, it was a section of the tunnel roof that collapsed. But sometimes, unfortunately, buildings can collapse. And if there is an earthquake, one of the ways in which a lot of people unfortunately die is through the collapse of buildings where they're living. So suddenly the building breaks at the bottom, some part of it breaks or is damaged, and this causes the whole structure to fall down dramatically into a big heap. A person can also collapse as well if perhaps they are not feeling very well and they suddenly fall down. Sometimes we call it to faint. Then this could also be another use of the word collapse. And finally, we also use it in the business sense. If a business collapses, it goes into administration, it goes bankrupt. When suddenly a business cannot continue to trade, that is another example of collapse. So it is quite a useful word, definitely worth remembering. So moving on to the next phrase. It's not a word this time, it's a phrase. And it is to work around the clock. This is, I think, actually quite easy to understand, really, because it's fairly literal. Even though it's an idiom, it's not so difficult to understand. To work around the clock literally means to work non-stop, 24 hours a day, if you like. And in this case, the rescuers obviously haven't stopped working because it's an urgent situation. They have to dig those trapped people out as quickly as possible because they are running low on food and oxygen. So for that reason, they've been working around the clock. Now, you might work around the clock if you have to meet a deadline at work. Perhaps you have to finish a project before a particular date, so you work around the clock to meet that deadline. Or perhaps you're a student and you have final exams, so you study around the clock. Another saying is to burn the candle at both ends, which essentially means the same thing. You're getting up very early and you're going to bed very late at night, working or studying. The next phrase we have here is another idiomatic phrase, to get in touch with. This is nothing to do with actually physically touching anybody here. What this means is to contact somebody. We often use it when we are telling people to contact us if they have a problem or if they have a question. Perhaps at the end of an email, we might say, please get in touch with me if you have any further questions. In this case, the rescuers have managed to make contact, to get in touch with those men who are trapped underground. So they have in some way, I think they've actually drilled a hole, they've made a hole, a small hole, so that they can pass food and water and oxygen to them. And also they are staying in touch with them by using radios as well. That brings us on to the next actual phrasal verb here, which is to give out. And this is a separable phrasal verb. So you give something out or you give out something. And after making contact, after getting in touch with the men, they've managed to pass food and supplies to them through the hole. So to give out is basically to distribute. So imagine somebody, you often see people in the street giving out flyers, giving out information about some kind of event, or sometimes in supermarkets or large commercial centers, you see people giving out samples, perhaps samples of food or samples of perfume. They give out those samples to the people who are passing by in order to try to let them sample it, to try to let them try it, and perhaps if they like it, they will buy it. So giving out usually involves distributing things to a large number of people. Moving on to the next word, we have another phrasal verb. This is to work out. And this is often used when we are talking about problems, problematic situations, because if you have a problem and you have to think of a solution, then we would use this. We would say we need to work out a solution or a plan in order to solve this problem. How are we going to do it? Quite often you might have some kind of meeting or brainstorming session in order to come up with ideas for solving a problem, in order to work out a solution. And that is what they're doing here. They're trying to work out a plan in order to rescue those people safely. So let's move on to the next paragraph. The trapped workers are reportedly in good spirits and have been killing time by singing songs and playing games. They are very brave and optimistic, said one of the rescuers who has been communicating with them. The workers' ordeal has been nothing short of hair-raising. One of them recounted his experience. I saw a massive rock come crashing down from the roof of the tunnel. As I ran towards the opening of the tunnel, hundreds of tons of debris fell, blocking the tunnel only a few meters away from me. So, looking at the first phrase here, we've got to kill time. This is an idiom that we often use when we have to wait for something. Imagine that you are at the airport and your flight has been delayed for a long time. Obviously, if you've ever been in that experience, you will know it's a very boring thing to happen to you. And there's not a lot you can do because you're stuck in the airport. You can't really leave. And perhaps you can go shopping. You can look at your mobile phone. Maybe you can read a book. All of those kind of activities are the things you might do in an airport to kill time. In other words, to make the time pass a little quicker because you're waiting for your flight. Now, in this case, of course, the people who are trapped in this tunnel are killing time. They're trying to distract themselves because they don't want to really think of their situation that they're in. And they are passing the time by doing these kind of activities like singing and playing games. And that is also trying to keep up their spirits. So they don't want to dwell on their situation. They don't want to think too much about the danger they're in. So it's a kind of distraction. So moving on to the next word we have here, it's the noun ordeal. An ordeal is not a pleasant thing. It's something, could be a series of events that we have to endure, something that is a real challenge to us personally, something that's painful. Examples of this could be many and varied, okay? But a few examples could be a health crisis. So if you have a serious illness and you have to spend a long time in hospital and you have to undergo an operation and a lot of time recovering from that operation, I would describe that as a real ordeal. Perhaps you go through a relationship ordeal. Perhaps you break up with your partner and you go through a long and painful divorce. That could be a good example of this as well. Or maybe a financial ordeal. Perhaps you have started up your own business, but things didn't go very well and you had to go bankrupt and you've perhaps lost your house as a consequence of that. That would be another example of an ordeal. In this case, obviously, the workers' ordeal is the fact that they are in this dangerous and difficult situation, and they don't know yet if they are going to escape with their lives. The next word is a compound adjective. It is hair-raising. And if we describe something as hair-raising, that means that it has scared us, it's frightened us in some way, or perhaps surprised us, shocked us. Think of it a little bit like the image of somebody in a cartoon. Quite often when they get surprised or shocked or scared, you see their hair literally rise off the top of their head and their eyes are wide open. So the adjective hair-raising is kind of using that visual imagery of the cartoon to give you an idea that this thing, whatever it was extremely shocking and scary. You could perhaps describe an attraction at a theme park as hair-raising, like a big roller coaster that spins you upside down or whatever, that could be a hair-raising experience. But of course, it could be used to describe any number of different things. If you are doing something difficult or dangerous, for example, doing bungee jumping, I would personally describe that as very hair-raising. So moving on to the next phrase, we have a phrasal verb to crash down. And really, the essence of this phrasal verb is quite similar to the verb itself, to crash. If you think of two cars traveling in opposite directions and hitting each other, this is often described as a traffic accident when two cars crash together. And that is essentially what is happening here. A massive rock has crashed into the floor. So it's fallen down from the roof and hit the floor at speed. And often when something crashes, there's often a big sound associated with that too. So moving on to the final word of this paragraph, we have the word debris. Now, debris is a little tricky because it's not really pronounced in the same way that it's spelt, and that's as is the case with a lot of words that come from foreign languages. In English, we preserve the spelling, and this is a French word originally, which meant to break apart. And that gives you a clue as to what it means, because debris is the kind of leftovers, the pieces of a wreckage or the broken parts of something that has collapsed or perhaps crashed. So, for example, if a vehicle like an airplane crashes, often little bits of it fly off and in the surrounding area, that would be called the debris. In this case, the debris consists of the rocks and the other building materials that are being used to construct the tunnel. And all of that material, that debris, has fallen inside the tunnel, and it's blocked the escape route of the workers. So let's move on to the final paragraph. The incident once again shines a light on the dangers of working in the construction industry. The workers were risking their lives to build a tunnel that would make people's lives easier. It's a tragedy that they had to pay such a high price for their work. The government should rethink its development model and respect the fragility of the Himalayas. The tunnel collapse is a wake-up call for us to protect our natural heritage and not compromise it for short-term gains, said Anil Joshi, an environmentalist. So the first phrase we have at the top here is to shine a light on. And this is quite a visual reference, really. It's an idiom, but it's fairly easy to understand if you look at the individual words. So to shine is something that lights do, really. A light bulb, when you switch it on, emits light. So we could say the light is shining. The sun shines when it's not cloudy. We can see the light coming from the sun and it's illuminating our surroundings. Equally, if it's dark and you want to illuminate a particular area, you can use a thing called a torch. In the olden days, they would use a fire on the end of a stick, but nowadays we have electric torches which use battery power. And you can use a torch to shine the light on a particular area. Even in a theatre, they have lights to illuminate the actors. They even have a thing called a spotlight, which shines the light directly onto the actor so you can see them easier. Now, in this case, it's using that metaphor to indicate that we are kind of focusing our attention on something, in this case, on the dangers of working in the construction industry. So it's another way of saying to highlight, to draw attention to, using this idiomatic language. Moving on to the next word, we have the noun fragility. This is very similar to the adjective fragile. If something is fragile, it means you can break it very easily. It's delicate. You have to pick it up or handle it with care. In fact, quite often you can see this on a package or a box which contains something that's delicate. It would say fragile, handle with care. So In this case, it's talking about the development in the Himalayas and the fact that that kind of environment is very fragile. It's very easy to disrupt it and damage it. And we should respect that fragility and take care of it. Finally, we have this phrase, a wake-up call. So this is a noun phrase, and a wake-up call is pretty closely connected with the verb to wake up. That's something we do every morning. Some of us do it naturally, others need an alarm clock. When the alarm rings, I wake up. I open my eyes and I get out of bed. Sometimes, if you are staying in a hotel, you might ask the reception to give you a wake-up call. So maybe you've got an important meeting early in the morning and you don't want to oversleep, so you ask them to call your room at a particular time. That is a literal wake-up call. But obviously we're using it in this case slightly idiomatically, so we're not talking about hotels or literally waking up. What it's saying is that the tunnel collapse is acting like a warning. It's supposedly going to bring people's attention to this problem of the fragility of the environment and the dangers involved with making tunnels through the Himalayas. So it is used idiomatically, but it's fairly connected with the original meaning, right? Perhaps we've been metaphorically asleep and it's time to wake up and pay attention to the problem. So that's it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have come across some new interesting words that you can use next time you speak English. Don't forget to check out my other videos. I've got quite a lot now, and I'm trying to do one a week. So if you've enjoyed it, please don't forget to click like, because that really demonstrates that you've enjoyed it, and that gives me motivation to make some more. Okay, so thank you, and until next time, goodbye.